There are moments in human history when the world feels like it is exhaling in exhaustion, when nations stumble in their own shadows, when leaders fall asleep at the wheel of justice, and when the heavens seem strangely silent. Such was the age into which Elion of Jericho Springs was born, a quiet, unassuming farmer living on the edges of a fractured kingdom whose spiritual heartbeat had slowed to a dangerous throb. Across the regions stretching from the cliffs near Petra to the bustling marketplaces of Cairo, the people of the land wandered after counterfeit gods carved from stone and wood. Their temples glimmered with gold but lacked breath. Their prayers echoed into emptiness. Corruption flowed through the courts, and the poor were crushed under the sandals of men who called themselves powerful. The widows cried out without relief. The orphans were forgotten. Even the priests, once guardians of light, now walked in compromise. Rumors swirled that God had withdrawn his voice from the northern hills, leaving only faint traces of his presence in the wind. But in truth, he was already preparing his answer, and that answer began in a field, under a sky that was about to split open with glory. The man who did not seek greatness. Elion was known only to the workers who shared his soil. He rose before dawn, his hands cracked from labor, his shoulders square from years of harnessing oxen across the land near Jericho Springs, a small but fertile basin known for its vineyards. His life was predictable, safe, and small, and yet within him lived a strange tension, a longing for something beyond the boundaries of the visible world. Some nights he would climb the hills overlooking the valley, sit on a stone ledge, and whisper questions into the star-laden sky. God of my fathers, are you still speaking? Do you still walk this earth? Do you see how we have forgotten you? He rarely received an answer, but the stars glimmered with enough warmth to keep hope alive. That hope would soon catch fire. The day the wind stood still, it happened on an ordinary morning, ordinary in every way except for the fact that heaven had already chosen it. Elion was guiding a team of oxen across the field, the soil soft beneath his feet, the sun rising in a slow amber glow. Then, without warning, the wind stopped. Not slowed, stopped. Birdsong died mid-melody. Dust froze in the air. Even the oxen ceased their movement, as though arrested by an unseen hand. Elion's breath caught in his chest. The sky, moments before gentle and blue, deepened into a shade of burning bronze. The very air thickened, charged like the moment before lightning strikes. Then he heard it, a whisper, not from above, not from around him, but within. Elion. He stumbled back, hands trembling. The whisper came again, gentle, resolute, familiar, though he had never heard it before. Elion, I have seen your heart. The farmer fell to his knees, dust rising around him. Who calls to me? He whispered, voice cracking, but the heavens did not reply with thunder or flame. Only the whisper remained soft, steady, undeniable. Yet before Elion could speak another word, the world snapped back into motion. The oxen lowed, the wind returned. A sparrow darted across the sky, as though nothing had happened. Elion pressed a shaking hand over his chest, knowing the impossible had occurred. God had spoken his name. He told no one. Who would believe him? The arrival of Master Joram. 2 days later, as Elion worked the same field, a figure appeared on the horizon, a silhouette walking against the rising heat. The man moved with an intensity that seemed out of place in a world of plows and dust. His cloak billowed in a strange rhythm, stirred by a wind that did not touch the surrounding grass. Elion knew that face. Everyone knew that face. It was Master Joram of the Sinai Cliffs, the prophet of fire and storms, the man whose prayers had broken droughts and whose voice could silence kings. Some whispered he walked with angels. Others whispered he walked with judgment. But one thing was certain. Joram did not visit farms. He appeared only where God sent him. Elion's heart pounded as the prophet approached, his eyes like burning coals, yet filled with an ancient sorrow, as though he carried the grief of a nation within his bones. Without a word, Joram walked into the field, stepped into Elion's furrows, and stood before him. "Are you Elion, son of Hadriel?" Elion swallowed hard. "I am." Joram studied him, not his face, but his soul. And in that long silence, Elion felt painfully exposed, as though every hidden thought lay open before the prophet. At last Joram spoke. "God has chosen you." Before Elion could protest, deny, or plead, Joram removed the mantle from his shoulders, a cloak woven from desert wool, singed at its edges from a dozen miracles, and cast it upon Elion. The weight of the mantle nearly drove him to the earth, not because it was heavy, but because it carried heaven upon it. As it touched his shoulders, Elion felt fire move beneath his skin, coursing through his arms and spine, settling into his bones like destiny itself. I am not worthy," Elion gasped, voice breaking. "None are," Joram replied, "yet God appoints as he wills." With that, the prophet turned and began to walk away. Elion stared after him, heart racing. Then, without hesitation, he ran. He left his plow, his oxen, his life. His workers called his name, but he did not look back. Something within him knew, when God calls, delay becomes disobedience. He caught up to Joram just beyond the vineyard road. "Master," Elion said breathless, "I will follow you." A flicker of what might have been approval crossed the prophet's face. "Then burn what would hold you, the sacrifice that sealed the call." Elion returned to his field, gathered wood, and slaughtered his oxen. The workers stared in shock as the flames rose high, consuming not just the animals, but the very tools of his trade. It was a sacrifice in every sense, his past, his livelihood, his identity. As the smoke curled toward the heavens, Elion whispered, "Let nothing remain that would tempt me to return." Some of the villagers wept. Others whispered that he had gone mad. But Elion's heart felt strangely light, like a man who had finally exhaled the truth he had held inside for years. Joram watched from a distance, arms crossed, expression unreadable. When Elion approached, smelling of smoke and oil, the prophet nodded once. "It begins, the journey of fire." Following Joram was not easy. The prophet walked with long, relentless strides, crossing rocky terrain and mountain passes without complaint. At times, he moved so quickly Elion wondered if an unseen force propelled him. But the journey was not merely physical. Joram seemed determined to test Elion's spirit. He offered no instruction, no affirmation, no explanation. He spoke only when God spoke. He paused only when commanded. He turned only when the wind shifted. Yet Elion followed. He followed through the markets of Jerusalem, where merchants argued and thieves prowled. He followed through the cliffs of Santorini, where the sea thundered against the rocks. He followed through the barren stretches near Petra, where the sun scorched the ground until it cracked. At night, Joram prayed with a fervor that shook the air. Elion often woke to find the prophet standing on a cliff edge, arms raised toward the stars, whispering words that carried the weight of ancient glory. Elion longed to ask questions. How do you hear God's voice? How do you endure the burden? How can I possibly follow in your steps? But he said nothing, and Joram offered nothing. The vision in the desert. One night, while they camped near the desert ruins outside Marrakesh, Elion awoke with a start. The desert wind was howling, turning the sand into spiraling towers that glowed faintly in the moonlight. Elion staggered to his feet. The sky split open with a tremor, not a literal tear, but a spiritual unveiling. He saw vast rivers turning to blood, mountains folding like cloth, nations bowing before an unseen throne. A still mighty voice whispered through the vision, "Walk faithfully, for you will carry what others cannot." Elion fell to his knees, trembling. When the vision faded, he looked to his side and found Joram standing silently behind him. "You saw it?" Joram said. Elion nodded, tears on his cheeks. "Master, what does it mean?" Joram placed a hand on his shoulder, something he had never done before. "It means," the prophet said quietly, "that heaven has already begun preparing for my departure." Elion's breath caught. "Departure? When?" "When the chariots come," Joram answered. A chill moved down Elion's spine. "Chariots?" But the prophet said no more. "The storm approaches." As days passed, Elion sensed the shift in the spirit realm. Animals grew restless. Birds flew in chaotic patterns. The air felt thick with impending glory. Joram's pace quickened. His prayers deepened. His eyes looked farther away, as though seeing another world. Finally, one evening near the ravines outside Santorini, the prophet stopped, turned to Elion, and spoke for the first time in days. "The time draws near." Elion swallowed hard. "Master, please do not leave me." Joram's gaze softened, not with pity, but with a depth of affection Elion had never seen in him. "If you see what heaven is about to reveal," he said, "then the blessing you seek shall be yours." A rumble of wind roared across the cliffs. Lightning flickered where there were no clouds. Elion's heart pounded. Someone was coming. The wind that swept across the cliffs near Santorini that day felt nothing like the wind of any earthly storm. It pulsed with a living heartbeat, like something ancient and invisible was drawing breath through the sky. Elion stood beside Master Joram, hands trembling, his mantle whipping violently against his legs. Somewhere inside those gale-force currents, Elion sensed what the prophets of old had spoken, in whispers. When heaven comes close enough to touch earth, nothing remains ordinary. Joram took one more step toward the ridge, his silhouette carved against the burning horizon. "Stay close to me," he said. Elion's voice cracked. "Master, is this the moment?" Joram did not answer. He only lifted his face toward the heavens, as though recognizing the arrival of an old friend. Then the world erupted. The ascent of Joram. A roar like the collision of oceans shook the cliffs. The sky split with blinding light, pouring over the earth like liquid fire. Elion shielded his eyes, but even through his arms he saw something impossible. A chariot made of living flame, drawn by horses that shone like molten gold. The air sizzled. Each hoofbeat rumbled like thunder. Elion gasped. "The armies of heaven." Joram turned toward him, eyes brighter than they had ever been. "My son," he said, "remember this. God does not abandon his people, and he does not choose lightly the one who bears his mantle." Elion reached for him, desperate. "Master, please, do not leave me." But heaven had already claimed him. The chariot descended with a roar that shook the rocks beneath their feet. A blazing whirlwind wrapped around Joram like a crown of fire. Elion felt himself lifted, then thrust backward as if an invisible hand pulled him away from the sacred event. He stumbled, falling onto the rocky ground, his breath ripped from his lungs. Through the swirling storm, he saw Joram rising, lifted into the sky in a spiral of fire, ascending beyond the reach of earth. "Master," Elion cried, voice cracking, my father, the chariots of God and their warriors." But Joram was gone. Only a stillness remained, an almost reverent silence that settled across the land. Then something fell from the sky, a fragment of fabric, a weight of destiny. The mantle. It landed at Elion's feet. Slowly, trembling, Elion picked it up. and as he wrapped it around his shoulders, the fire of heaven surged into his spirit. The earth seemed to tilt beneath him. His breath caught in his throat. Joram had not left him empty. He had left him twice filled. A new prophet rises. The return journey was nothing like the one Elion had taken with his master. When he walked back through the villages, Jericho Springs, Damascus Road, the outskirts of Jerusalem, people stopped and stared, for word had traveled fast. Some said they saw flashes of fire in the sky. Others claimed they heard a roar like 1,000 trumpets. And when Elion approached the banks of the Jordan River, a crowd of apprentices, scholars, and villagers had already gathered. They murmured among themselves, "That is Joram's disciple. Does he carry the mantle? Can he truly take the prophet's place?" Elion paused at the water's edge. It churned with strong currents, reflecting the red glow of the setting sun. His heart pounded. This was his first public test, his first moment to prove whether God indeed walked with him as he had with Joram. He lifted the mantle, still warm with unearthly fire, and struck the river. "Where is the God of Joram?" he cried. "Let his presence speak." The waters shuddered. Then they tore apart, splitting into towering walls on both sides, revealing a dry path through the middle. Gasps erupted from the watching crowd. The apprentices fell to their knees. Even the elders bowed. "The spirit of Joram rests upon Elion," they cried. And though Elion walked through the parted waters with steady feet, his heart trembled with wonder. God had spoken. The mantle had meaning. The calling was real. The cursed springs of Lisbon. Not long after Joram's ascension, word reached Elion of a city in crisis, a once thriving settlement near the coastal cliffs of Lisbon. Its springs had become bitter, poisoning crops, animals, even children. The elders cried out for help, saying, "If God has raised a new prophet, let him deliver us." Elion traveled there with haste. When he arrived, the sight pierced his soul. Mothers kneeling beside sick children, fields turning barren, streams so toxic they frothed at the edges. A group of elders approached him. "Master Elion," they pleaded, "this land is beautiful, but our water brings death. If God has called you, show us mercy." Elion looked upon their desperation and felt the ache of heaven stirring within him. He reached into his satchel, withdrew a small clay vessel of salt, and climbed a jagged rock overlooking the springs. He raised his hands. "By the word of the Lord," he declared, "let life return where death has made its home." He poured the salt into the spring. The water hissed steam rising in a sudden burst. Then the springs grew still, peaceful and clear. A silence fell over the gathered crowd. A child dipped her hand into the water, tasted it, and her face broke into a smile. "It is sweet." Cheers erupted, echoing across the cliffs of Lisbon. Elion stepped back, humbled. "Not by my hand," he whispered, "but by the God who heals nations." Mara of Thessaloniki and the oil of hope. From Lisbon, Elion traveled eastward through rugged terrain toward Thessaloniki. There, he encountered a woman named Mara, a widow recently crushed by the death of her husband, a scholar who had feared the Lord. Mara's voice trembled as she told him, "My husband left me with debts I cannot pay. The creditors threatened to take my sons as servants. I have nothing left but a small jar of oil." Her eyes reflected a pain. Elion recognized the same pain he once saw in the eyes of orphans, widows, farmers, and kings alike. "Do not fear," he said gently. "Gather as many empty vessels as you can from your home and from your neighbors, and close your door behind you." Startled but trusting, Mara obeyed. Inside her home, lit only by a dim lantern, the miracle began. Mara tilted her tiny jar. Oil flowed, and flowed, and flowed. Her sons scrambled, bringing more vessels, bowls, flasks, jars, even hollowed stones. The oil filled each one until it overflowed onto the floor. Tears streamed down Mara's face as she realized the truth. When God provides, He does not give barely enough, He gives abundantly. When every vessel was full, the oil stopped. Elion returned the next morning. "Sell the oil," he said, "pay your debts, and live freely thereafter." Mara fell to her knees in gratitude. For the first time in years, hope had returned to her home. The secret struggles of a prophet. Though miracles spread Elion's fame across the lands from Cairo's markets to the temples of Petra, the prophet himself struggled with a burden that few knew. At night, when the crowds dispersed and silence returned, Elion would wander to a place alone, some rooftop or hillside, and whisper into the darkness, "Lord, why me? I am only Elion of Jericho Springs. How can I bear what Joram carried?" On one such night, he lay awake beneath the stars, remembering the feel of Joram's hand on his shoulder, the weight of the fiery mantle, the roar of heaven's chariot. 1,000 doubts swirled through him. Then, unexpectedly, a small shadow approached. A child no older than 8, with tear-filled eyes. "Master Elion," the girl said quietly, "I cannot sleep. The night spirits frighten me." Moved with compassion, Elion knelt beside her. "Come," he whispered, "let us ask the God who watches the night to guard your dreams." He placed a hand upon her head and prayed. The child's breathing slowed, her tears dried, and she fell asleep peacefully. Elion carried her back to her home. As he walked away, he thought, perhaps this is the calling, not just miracles, not just nations, but moments like this, to be the presence of God where fear lives. For the first time since Joram's departure, Elion felt peace settle upon his shoulders, the whisper of a foreign general. Even as Elion performed miracles in Lisbon, Thessaloniki, and the surrounding regions, rumors grew of a powerful warrior, a general named Adras of Istanbul, who commanded vast armies across the eastern territories. Adras was known for his strategic brilliance, his victories in battle, and his stern leadership. But now he faced an enemy he could not conquer, a deadly affliction that slowly consumed his flesh. Physicians from Cairo to Athens had tried and failed. Priests from foreign temples offered rituals to no avail. Then news reached him of a prophet whose God healed waters, multiplied oil, and called fire from heaven. Adras clenched his fist. "Find this man," he commanded his officers, "for if his God can restore my flesh, I will offer him more devotion than all my ancestors combined." But Adras did not yet understand the God he sought. For the God of Elion was not moved by gold or power. He was moved by humility, and Adras's heart was not yet ready. The shadow of politics. As Elion's fame grew, so did interest from kings, governors, and high officials. Some sought him for genuine spiritual guidance. Others sought him for political advantage, hoping to use his miracles to legitimize their rule. A letter arrived from a monarch in the north, bearing the royal seal of a king in Vienna. It said, "Prophet Elion, come to my court. My kingdom needs miracles." Elion folded the letter and set it aside. Another came from Cairo. "Perform wonders for my people, and let us say that our gods and your God walk together." Elion burned that letter, for he knew the truth. What is holy cannot be chained to the ambitions of the powerful. And so he continued to walk the dusty roads, meeting common people in their suffering, speaking to shepherds more often than kings. A new threat emerges. Yet even as Elion healed the sick and restored the broken, something darker stirred beneath the surface of the land. Whispers reached him from travelers' rumors of soldiers patrolling the region near Istanbul, of nations preparing for war, of a rising general whose affliction made him unpredictable. And then came the message that changed everything. Adras of Istanbul is coming to find you. Elyon narrowed his eyes. The miracles he had performed were only the beginning. God was preparing something larger, something that would shake kingdoms, and Elyon, whether he felt ready or not, would be the vessel. The morning that Adras of Istanbul began his journey toward Elyon, the sky over the Bosphorus was the color of faded steel, flat, heavy, and ominous. The great general stood upon the balcony of his fortress, wrapped in a cloak lined with wolf fur. His once mighty shoulders now trembled beneath the fabric. His skin, once unblemished and bronzed by countless campaigns, was blotched with the creeping disease that had become his greatest adversary. No weapon could defeat it. No physician could slow it. No prayer from the idols of his ancestors could silence it. Adras had conquered cities across continents, stretching from Istanbul to the deserts of Jordan to the heights near Athens, yet he could not conquer this, and slowly the disease was conquering him. His wife, Lady Seraphina, stood behind him, her face lined with worry. "You leave today," she whispered, "to find a prophet you have never met. Do you trust this journey, or is this only the desperation of a dying man?" Adras turned toward her. The fire in his eyes, once fierce, commanding fear from nations, had dimmed. "I have exhausted every source," he said. "If the God of this Elyon can restore what the gods of my fathers have not, then I must go." "But your pride," Seraphina began. "My pride," Adras interrupted, "is a luxury I can no longer afford." He placed his armored hand on hers, breathing shallowly. "If there is even a sliver of hope, I will chase it." And so he left, accompanied by soldiers, servants, advisors, and chests of gold and silver meant as tribute. But as he departed his homeland, Adras had no idea his journey would not be one of wealth, strength, or diplomacy. It would be a journey of breaking, a journey of exposure, a journey that would fracture his pride. Selah of Bethlehem Hills. Miles away, in the quiet village nestled between the rolling greens of Bethlehem Hills, a young servant girl named Selah finished grinding barley into flour. Her hands were small and calloused, her hair tied in a simple braid. She had been captured during a border conflict years earlier and brought into Adras's household, where she served Seraphina with quiet faithfulness. Though a servant, Selah possessed a kind of unshakable inner peace that even Seraphina envied. That morning, Selah prepared herbs to soothe Seraphina's nerves. As she placed the herbs in boiling water, the lady turned toward her. "Selah, what shall become of him? What hope does a dying general have?" Selah hesitated, then spoke words that would alter the course of nations. "My lady," she said gently, "there is a prophet in the lands near Jericho Springs. His God, he is not like the gods of our lands. He hears, he sees, he works wonders. I have seen his power. If anyone can heal Lord Adras, it is the God who walks with this prophet." Seraphina turned sharply. "You speak boldly." "Only because I believe," Selah said softly. "If Lord Adras were to seek Elyon, I believe the God of Israel would show mercy." Those words, spoken by a servant, lit a spark within Seraphina's trembling heart. The journey across nations. And so Adras set out, guided not by strategy, but by the fragile thread of hope spoken from the lips of a servant girl. The journey carried him through vast and diverse landscapes, across the marble bridges of Rome, where scholars watched his procession with curiosity, through the rugged passes of Macedonia, where storms lashed at the caravan for 3 days, over the plains near Ankara, where desert winds tore through tents and battered horses. But it was the emotional journey, not the physical one, that weighed on Adras most heavily. Each night, the disease spread further. Each morning his strength diminished. Each hour a voice inside whispered, "This prophet will not help you. You are too great a sinner." But Adras pushed onward not with confidence, but with desperation. When they reached the outskirts of Jericho Springs, a strange stillness rested over the land, as though it were holding its breath for what was to come, the humbling of a war leader. Elion was sitting beneath an olive tree when the sound of horses echoed across the hillside. He lifted his eyes and saw dust rising from the valley below, dozens of soldiers in formation, glinting armor, banners fluttering. The villagers fled indoors. Some whispered that war was coming. Others feared that Elion had become the target of foreign armies. But Elion remained in place, calm as a stone set by God himself. When the chariot stopped in front of him, Adras stepped out. Though stepped was generous, he nearly collapsed. "I am Adras," he said weakly, "general of Istanbul, conqueror of—" "You stand before God, not before men." Elion interrupted gently, "State not your titles, state your need." Humiliation sliced through Adras like a blade. In his homeland, rulers bowed before him. Here, a humble prophet did not even stand to greet him. "My need," Adras whispered, shame flooding him. "My need is mercy." Elion looked upon him, not with disgust, but with the compassion of a shepherd watching an injured lamb. "Go," Elion said. "Wash yourself 7 times in the Danube River." Adras blinked in confusion. "The Danube? That river near Budapest? That water is not holy." "It is not the river that heals," Elion replied. "It is obedience." Adras staggered back, enraged. "I traveled across nations. I brought riches. I expected you to call upon your God, wave your hand, and restore me." Elion shook his head. "Your pride is your true sickness, the breaking point." Adras stormed away from Elion, climbing into his chariot. His soldiers exchanged uneasy glances, unsure whether to follow his fury or his suffering. When they reached the riverbank of the Danube, Adras removed his armor piece by piece, slowly, painfully. Each metal plate dropped into the grass with a thud that echoed his unraveling pride. One of his most trusted captains approached him. "My lord, if the prophet had commanded you to do something great and difficult, would you not have done it? Why then not submit to something simple?" Adras closed his eyes. The words struck deep. Without a word, he stepped into the cold river. The water stung his wounded flesh. The soldiers watched in silence. First immersion, he felt nothing. Second, his anger rose. Third, his shame surfaced. Fourth, he saw flashes of battles, victories that meant nothing now. Fifth, he whispered, "God of Elion, do you see me?" Sixth, he swallowed a sob he did not know he carried. Seventh, he plunged beneath the water completely. When he rose, the river poured off him in sheets of silver. The soldiers gasped. Seraphina's voice echoed in his memory. Selah's words whispered to him like wind. Adras looked down at his flesh, clear, restored, whole as the day of his youth. He collapsed onto his knees in the river, weeping not like a general, but like a man rescued from the grave. The general returns to the prophet. Adras rode back to Elion with urgency, not pride. When he dismounted, he fell to the prophet's feet. "There is no God anywhere on earth but the God you serve," Adras said, voice steady with newfound conviction. "Accept this gift as a token of gratitude." Elion shook his head. "Is God a servant that he should be paid? Rise, Adras. What he gives is free." Adras rose slowly. "Then let me at least take earth from this land, so that when I kneel in prayer in Istanbul, I may kneel upon soil touched by your God." Elion nodded. "Take what you need, but remember God's presence does not dwell in soil, but in surrendered hearts." Adras bowed deeply. "I am no longer the man I was." Then he made a curious request. "May God forgive me when my duties require me to stand beside my king during ceremonies of false gods. My body may bow, but my heart will bow to none but the Lord." Elion's eyes softened. "God sees the posture of the heart. Go in peace." Adras embraced the mantle of humility, and in doing so, embraced the God he had long ignored. A soldier's secret conversion. Among Adras's soldiers was a quiet man named Tarvan, whose faith in his homeland's idols had always been lukewarm. He had watched his general's transformation with awe. That night, Tarvan approached Elion in secret. "Master," he whispered, "I have witnessed the power of your God. I wish to serve him, but I am a soldier, trained in violence. What can God do with hands like mine?" Elion looked into the man's eyes and said, "God can turn a sword into a shield, a warrior into a guardian, a servant into a witness." Tarvan fell to his knees. "Then let me be his." Elion placed a hand on his head and prayed. Tarvan rose with peace flooding his chest, a peace he had never known in battle. The news that shook kingdoms. Adras's return to Istanbul caused uproar. Across palace walls and marketplaces, whispers flew. "The general is healed. The God of Israel has power." No temple priest could do what Elion's God has done. Kingdoms trembled at the implications. Priests grew jealous. Kings grew intrigued and uneasy. God's movement was spilling into foreign lands, and his prophet was becoming known not only within Israel, but across the world. Elion knew this marked only the beginning. Miracles were no longer localized events, they were becoming political catalysts, forces that would cross borders, challenge empires, and stir ancient enemies. But even as his influence rose, Elion remained steady, still walking dusty roads, still praying in hidden places, still seeking God in the quiet. And heaven watched, for the next chapter was preparing to unfold. Long after the healing of Adras of Istanbul, the name Elion of Jericho Springs spread far beyond the borders of his homeland. Traders traveling from Nairobi's markets, merchants from Rio de Janeiro's ports, scholars from Kyoto's temples, and fishermen from the coasts of Marrakesh all repeated the same testimony. There lives a prophet whose God sees all, hears all, and answers with power. Some came for healing, some for wisdom, others out of curiosity. The roads leading to Jericho Springs grew worn from the feet of travelers, and though Elion welcomed each soul with compassion, he also sensed the weight of heaven pressing upon him with new urgency. For beneath the noise of miracles and the gratitude of the people, a darker movement stirred across the earth, a tension gathering like storm clouds preparing to rupture. The shadow of war. Far to the north, beyond the mountains near Machu Picchu, a rising kingdom began consolidating power. Its rulers, proud, ruthless, hungry for expansion, heard tales of Elion and viewed his influence as a threat. Among them was King Malchior of Cusco Ridge, a man known for his cunning strategies and ruthless suppression of dissent. When word reached him that Elion had healed the great general Adras, Malchior became furious. "If this prophet can sway warriors and kings," the king said, "he could turn the hearts of my people against me. Power does not bow to prophets." Malchior ordered his military commander, General Vascor, to scout the lands surrounding Jericho Springs. "Find Elion," Malchior commanded. "Watch his movements, learn his habits, and when he stands alone, bring him to me." Vascor bowed stiffly. "It will be done." But Malchior did not realize that Elion's protection did not come from guards, walls, or human strength. His protection came from a realm Malchior could neither see nor comprehend. The siege of Dubrovnik. Around this same time, Elion traveled to a fortified coastal city, reminiscent of Dubrovnik, with ancient stone walls and a harbor filled with merchant ships. The city, Marisol Haven, was famed for its trade routes, but now it faced a devastating famine. Crops had withered, wells had dried, and foreign raiders hovered like vultures, waiting for weakness. When Elion arrived, he found the streets lined with gaunt faces, hollow eyes, and trembling hands. Children cried for bread. Mothers begged for help. The elderly sat silently, staring into an abyss of despair. Elion's heart broke. "Lord," he whispered, looking over the city walls toward the horizon, "how long will your people suffer?" The answer came not in thunder, but in a storm of circumstances that would test Elion's faith more than any miracle before. Ramon, the fearful servant. Traveling with Elion was a young man named Ramon, who had joined him months earlier out of admiration. Ramon was earnest, loyal, and thoughtful, but deeply fearful. Even the rustle of wind through olive branches made him jump. Where Elion saw God's hand, Ramon saw danger. Where Elion walked boldly, Ramon hesitated. "Master," Ramon whispered, as they climbed the stone steps above Marisol Haven. "The armies gathering outside the walls, they look like a sea of iron. How can we stand against them? We have no weapons, no soldiers." "We have the Lord," Elion replied. "That is what terrifies me," Ramon muttered, "for I cannot see him." Elion smiled softly. "Then today you shall." The dawn of invisible armies. On the following morning, the city awoke to the sight of enemy soldiers covering the hills surrounding Marisol Haven, men from Malchior's allied tribes, commanded by General Vascor. Their armor shimmered like obsidian in the sunrise. Ramon shook Elion awake in panic. "Master, we are surrounded. There is no escape. The king's armies are upon us." Elion stretched calmly and stepped outside as though waking to birdsong, not battle. "Do not fear," he said. "Those who are with us are more than those who are with them." Ramon stared at him in disbelief. "Master, with respect, I see no one with us." Elion placed a hand on Ramon's trembling shoulder. "Then ask the Lord to open your eyes." He lifted his face to heaven. "Lord, reveal what is unseen." A wind swept upward from the cliffs, gentle at first, then roaring with growing power. Ramon felt something tugging at his spirit, a veil lifting from his perception. And then he saw. The hills that moments before had been filled only with enemy soldiers were now overflowing with chariots of fire, tens of thousands of them. Their wheels burned with celestial flame. Their horses were made of lightning and smoke. Warrior angels stood armored in radiance, fierce, silent, immovable. Ramon fell backward, hands shaking violently. "Master, Master, what is this glory?" Elion smiled. "This is the army of the Lord. He has not abandoned us. He fights for us." At that moment, General Vascor issued the command to attack. "Go," Elion whispered, "and strike the armies with blindness." A wave of heavenly power rippled out from Elion and swept across Vascor's forces. Confusion erupted. Soldiers staggered, disoriented, dropping weapons and shields. Some fell to their knees, others cried out in terror. Elion approached them peacefully. "Come," he said to the blinded soldiers, "I will lead you to the one you seek." And he guided them, not to Malchior, not to an ambush, but safely into the heart of Marisol Haven. When their sight returned at Elion's prayer, they found themselves unharmed and surrounded not by enemies, but by curious villagers. Vascor turned to Elion with awe. You did not kill us. Why spare us?" "Because," Elion said gently, "mercy reveals the heart of God more clearly than destruction." The soldiers returned to their homeland with a message that shook Malchior's throne. "We did not encounter a prophet. We encountered a kingdom greater than any on earth." The famine and the miracle of hope. Despite the protective intervention, Marisol Haven still faced famine. The siege had crushed trade routes, and families struggled to survive. Elion walked the narrow streets, passing men too weak to stand, mothers cradling infants who no longer cried because starvation had stolen their strength. He stopped before a young couple with a newborn, their faces gaunt but determined. "We prayed," the husband said, "but heaven is silent." "Silence," Elion replied, "is sometimes the breath before God speaks." He gathered the people in the city's central square and lifted his hands. "Lord," he prayed, "you who fed your people in the desert, who provided for Mara in Thessaloniki, who gives rivers in barren places, send provision." The crowd lowered their heads, expecting nothing but wishing desperately for hope. Then, from the harbor, a horn blasted. Ramon gasped, "Master, look!" Dozens of ships appeared on the horizon, merchant ships from Lisbon, Tunis, Alexandria, and even Mumbai. The captains, moved by dreams and spiritual burdens they could not explain, had sailed with holds full of grain, oil, dried fruits, and water. "We felt a presence compel us," one captain said, a whisper saying, "Go to Marisol Haven." The people erupted with cries, some weeping, some dancing, some falling to their knees. Food was distributed across every district, starving children ate their fill, elders wept openly, and Elion whispered, "Lord, you are near to the broken-hearted." The death and legacy of the prophet. Years passed. Elion continued to serve the people, healing the sick, guiding rulers toward justice, restoring the faith of nations. But time, as always, moved forward. One day, while traveling near the vast canyonlands reminiscent of the Grand Canyon, Elion laid down to rest. His hair had turned white, his body frail, but his eyes still glowed with heaven's fire. Ramon knelt beside him. "Master, do not leave us." Elion smiled. "The work is not mine. It never was. It belongs to the Lord. I go to him who sent me." He gave Ramon his final blessing. Then he closed his eyes peacefully, without fear, and breathed his last. Elion was buried in a tomb carved into the Red Canyon wall. People from across nations came to mourn him. Widows he had helped, children he had healed, kings he had advised, and even soldiers like Tarvin, who had found new faith through him. But Elion's story was not finished. The bones that awakened the dead. Months after his burial, a battle broke out near the canyon. Raiders ambushed a small caravan of shepherds. In the chaos, one young shepherd, Neriel, was struck down by an arrow. His friends panicked, unsure where to take his body as the enemy closed in. "Throw him into the prophet's tomb," one cried. "It is the nearest shelter." They rushed to the canyon, lifted the stone slab, and placed Neriel's lifeless body beside Elion's. As the stone closed, a tremor rippled through the ground. A wind thin but powerful swept through the canyon, curling through the cracks like the breath of God. Inside the tomb, Neriel's body touched Elion's bones, and life surged like lightning. Neriel opened his eyes. He gasped. He stood. The shepherds outside stumbled backward as he pushed aside the stone, blinking at the sunlight. Where am I?" he whispered. They fell to their knees. "The prophet's bones, they gave you life." Word spread like wildfire. Elion's legacy had been sealed with a miracle that defied logic, time, and death. A prophecy set in motion. Travelers began reporting strange experiences near Elion's tomb, visions of radiant figures, whispers of hope, dreams foretelling the arrival of a Redeemer who would walk the earth with greater authority than any prophet before him. Ramon wrote down Elion's final words. "The Lord is preparing the way for the one who will heal, not just nations, but hearts, not just bodies, but souls. Watch for him. Elion's life became a bridge, a foreshadowing of a greater prophet, a greater healer, a greater savior who would one day step into history. And the world, knowingly or not, began preparing for him. The years following Elion's passing did not fade like ordinary years. They pulsed through history like a heartbeat. His name, once spoken only in small gatherings and whispered prayers, became a banner of hope carried across regions stretching from Cairo to Barcelona, from the golden temples of Kathmandu to the vineyards near Tuscany. Children grew up hearing stories of his compassion. Elders recalled miracles they witnessed firsthand. Travelers from every direction followed the path leading toward the Red Canyon where his tomb rested. Yet the greatest weight of Elion's ministry did not lie in the miracles he performed, nor in the nations he influenced, nor even in the resurrection that occurred when a man's lifeless body touched his bones. No, his greatest legacy lived in the transformation of hearts, the reawakening of faith in a world that had grown numb to the presence of God. In those days, the land lay between two realities, the memory of Elion's miracles and the longing for the greater one he had prophesied, the one who would not merely call down fire, but carry heavenly fire within himself. The final blessings of a prophet. Before Elion's death, he spent his final days traveling through villages and towns, pouring out blessings upon all who came to him. Though his body weakened, his spirit grew stronger, as if heaven was drawing nearer with each breath. One afternoon, in the bustling markets of Tunis, Elion stood before a crowd and spoke with a voice that did not match his aging frame. "Hear me, people of the nations," he said. "The Lord is raising one after me, one who will walk not only with the power of God, but as the very word of God. His coming will change the tides of the earth." A fisherman in the crowd asked, "Will this one be a prophet like you?" "No," Elion replied softly. "Greater, far greater, for I am but a shadow of the substance that is to come." Another time, in the quiet hill country near Tuscany, Elion sat beside a widow and prayed strength over her children. When he rose, he whispered to Ramon, "Blessing the broken is greater than speaking to kings. Remember that." In Alexandria, he gathered scholars and scribes, urging them to preserve truth, not tradition. In Barcelona, he blessed a young woman who felt forgotten by the world, telling her, "The eyes of heaven have never lost sight of you." And in Jericho Springs, where his journey began, he lifted his hands over the people and declared, "May the Lord raise in your generation sons and daughters who hunger for righteousness, not applause, who serve from their knees, not from their thrones." His voice cracked on the last sentence. Those who stood close saw tears in his eyes. He knew his time was near. The impact on foreign nations. Following Elion's death, traders and travelers carried his story across continents. In the stone courtyards of Athens, philosophers debated the nature of his miracles. In Johannesburg, families told their children about the prophet whose bones awakened the dead. In Mumbai, priests wondered if Elion's God was reaching out to reshape the world. 3 stories emerged that would shape global understanding of his influence. 1. The Merchant of Lisbon. A merchant from Lisbon, who had once brought supplies to famine-struck Marisol Haven, returned home and established a benevolent society that fed the poor of his city. When asked what inspired him, he replied, "I saw God provide through a prophet. Now I will provide for others because of that same God." 2. The Scholar of Tokyo. A Japanese scholar who heard of Elion through travelers from the West devoted her life to studying ancient prophecies. She documented visions that, according to her, pointed to a coming Messiah. In her writings, she stated, "The miracles of the prophet point to a greater light yet to rise over the nations." 3. The Warrior of Istanbul. Tarvin, the soldier who converted after Adras's healing, returned to Istanbul and quietly established small groups of believers throughout the city. These gatherings grew into communities known for generosity, courage, and unity. Their message was simple: we follow the God who healed our general and forgave our sins. Elion's inner reflections. Though Elion's public ministry shone brightly, his private struggles were etched deep into the memory of Ramon, his closest companion. In a leather-bound journal Ramon later kept, he wrote down the conversations Elion shared during his last days. "I fear," Elion once confessed, "that people may look to me instead of to God." "But Master," Ramon replied, "you speak his name in every miracle." "Ah," Elion whispered, "but human hearts cling easily to what they can see, and I want them to cling to the one who cannot be contained by sight." Another night, beneath a sky glowing over the deserts near Amman, Elion said quietly, "I doubted once. After Joram left, I wondered if God would stay with me. The mountains felt large, the mantle felt heavy, and though the people saw miracles, they did not see my trembling knees." Ramon was stunned. "You doubted?" Elion smiled gently. "True faith is not the absence of trembling, it is walking forward even while trembling." Ramon never forgot those words. A new generation rises. Elion's last great task before his death was the raising of successors, young men and women who carried the same fire, compassion, and spiritual discernment that marked his life. 3 of them became especially notable. 1. Leora the Compassionate Flame. A young woman from Alexandria, known for her healing touch and tender heart, she wept with the grieving, sat with the mentally tormented, and brought comfort where no cure existed. Compassion, Elion told her, is a miracle in motion. 2. Simeon, the Defender of Justice, a strong, determined young man from Johannesburg who fought for the oppressed and challenged corrupt rulers. He once confronted an official who had exploited orphans, declaring, "The God of Elion sees what you hide." 3. Darius the Worshipper. A quiet youth from Tuscany, gifted in music and prayer, his melodies stirred spiritual hunger in listeners. It was said that when he sang, broken hearts mended and anxious minds found peace. To each, Elion spoke a unique commissioning. To Leora, heal the wounds no one else notices. To Simeon, protect the innocent. Stand tall for truth. To Darius, let your worship open doors heaven intends to walk through. When Elion died, these 3 became pillars of a spiritual renewal that swept across nations. Their ministries were not identical, but they all carried Elion's heartbeat for God and humanity. The final vision. In his last days, Elion saw a vision more profound than anything before. Ramon later recorded it in detail. "Master's eyes grew distant," Ramon wrote, "as if beholding something not of this world. His voice trembled with awe." Elion described the vision. "I see one approaching, a figure walking upon the waters of every nation, from the Thames of London to the Nile of Egypt. His footsteps calm storms, his voice restores the broken. Where he walks, demons tremble. Where he speaks, chains fall. Where he touches, life surges." Ramon whispered, "Is he a prophet, Master?" "No," Elion said. "He is the promise itself, the one my miracles only whispered of. I saw glimpses of him in every act of mercy, in every rising sun, in every healed wound. And now he draws near." Elion closed his eyes and breathed for the last time on earth. Prepare the way, he is coming. The world prepares for the Redeemer. In the decades that followed, Elion's teachings helped shape the spiritual landscape of entire regions. His prophecies were studied in Alexandria's libraries, spoken in the markets of Marrakesh, preached from the hills of Tuscany, and carried along the trade routes of Istanbul. Yet his greatest legacy was the anticipation he stirred. People began watching the horizon differently. Parents told their children, "A greater one will come." Scholars debated the signs. Worshippers prayed with deeper expectation. And when the time was right, decades after Elion's tomb was sealed, stories began to circulate of a child born under unusual circumstances in a humble town, a story that ordinary people could not ignore. Some recalled Elion's final words, "Prepare the way." Others whispered, "Is this the one he spoke of?" The world leaned forward, a legacy without end. Though Elion's body rested in the Red Canyon, his impact rippled outward like circles in water. The resurrected shepherd Neriel lived for many years, telling his story to thousands. Ramon became a chronicler, preserving detailed accounts of Elion's life, miracles, and prophecies. Even centuries later, followers of God would say, "We walk in the wake of Elion's obedience." But Elion would have rejected such praise. He would say, "Do not follow me. Follow the one whose footsteps I only glimpsed." His life was a lantern. His miracles were signposts. His death was not an ending, but a doorway. And his prophecy that a Redeemer would come became the foundation upon which generations built their faith. Elion's bones had raised a man, but the one who would come would raise humanity. The mantle was passed not from prophet to prophet, but from heaven to earth, and the story that began in Jericho Springs now flowed into a far greater river, the river of redemption God had planned before the world began.